Welcome to Hidden Squids Gaming. That's right, another tier video. I'm not going to go incredibly in depth about each hero to save some time. I have a series of hero reviews where I review their skills and what I think of them, so if you really want my opinion and the idea of their skills, please go to that. This video is going to be more of a discussion and an objective look at stats, skills, and team compositions. Before we continue, there are 3 things I would like to address quickly. First off, this is for fun and discussion. The tiers are based off of number totals and opinion. And the grade does not mean the hero is always good or always bad. I'm going to be a rebel and address the last one first. All these heroes can be good in the game and should probably have a spot in your roster. Taking in an S or an A tier that I think are an S or A tier can actually make you worse initially. They may not be something you're accustomed to, thus you're actually going to be worse off than if you're using someone in the C and D tier that I'm going to have. So don't assume that the hero is bad if I say they're D ranked. It just means maybe you'll see what I mean. Their overall versatility and maybe skills aren't exactly the best compared to other individuals. Second, how did I score this? Some people just kind of willy-nilly say I feel like they're this. I actually try to take an objective look, and this is how I did it. I looked at 5 fields: attack row versatility, damage, stats, party positioning, which means on your side, which rows they're good at, and then obviously their skills. I tried to equally weigh them all out 20%, and how I did this was, each one of these got a score of S to D, S being 5 points and D being 1 point. These were then added up and then categorized into tiers. I will show these scores per slide to see how we arrived to these stats. Obviously, ranking them from S to D is where the complete subjectivity comes into play. Thus, you may also disagree with the fact that some of these should not all have 20% equal leverage. You may say, well, skills should really have 50% of the leverage while the rest completely add up to 50%. I did an equal 20 just to make it easy on my end, but if you disagree with one character or my entire tier grade, please let me know. I look forward to the conversations. I will do my best to respond to you. And I just want to let you know that S is the highest tier rank, D is the lowest. And here's the thing, I did not want to just jam 10 people into B because, I didn't want to be controversial, someone's favorite character. I pretty much did a forced distribution, which means I have 3 S's, 4 A's, 4 B's, 4 C's, and 2 D's. So there's going to be some characters you think, how the heck did you put him in a C, or how the heck did you put him into A? Well, that's kind of how that's going to work out. I really made myself make sure no hero had an equal number of points in a different tier. So you're not going to see a 19 point A and a 19 point B. That's not happening. But you will see like maybe 2 to 3 17 point B's or something like that, because obviously they belong in the same tier together. Now let's get to the video. Highwayman, 24 points. Highwaymen are easily one of the best classes. The one real average stat he has is his speed, which is made up by his critical strike since they give +2 speed. He has insane damage with Wicked Slice, point blank shot, and obviously one of the best mechanics in the game, riposte. He can be a viable ranged character or melee character, thus he can function between rows 1 to 4 extremely well. He has DOT damage and can work semi-okay in a mark strategy, though he's already pretty great outside of that. He can work very well in a static party, but he can also work extremely well in a party that just keeps on shuffling. If you need a damage dealer, the Highwayman will fit into any of your parties more times than not, thus being in the S tier. His versatility, damage, team-friendly compositions, stats, and attack row diversity are almost unrivaled. Thus, I think he belongs pretty much at the top of every character in the game. Shieldbreaker, 22 points. In some ways, the Shieldbreaker is like the Highwayman. Some of her stats are better in some areas and obviously worse in others. The biggest ones that are much better are her speed, critical strike, and just the raw damage of her weapon in the higher end. Despite not having a riposte mechanic, she does have some other unique mechanics that decimates enemies, thus being a guard break and a block. She's incredibly powerful against enemies without high protection, and obviously against enemies with high protection. Her critical strike buff allows her to gain more protection, thus her lower HP can actually be made greater than it initially appears. Also, her ability Impale will grant you possibly multiple crits, thus you will get that protection bonus very quickly. Her row versatility is also probably one of the best in the game, if not maybe the best in the game if you consider Pierce. She definitely belongs in the S. You can decide whether or not you would put her above the Highwayman, but I do think the Highwayman is much more team friendly sometimes. Hellion, 20 points. Quick shout out, this was hard between this character and the next one, but I think overall, just looking at the stats and skills, I'm going to put a Hellion in the S tier. I don't often find myself using many Hellions, but they are extremely effective and they're very good for crowd control when you do use them. There are plenty of heroes who can pump out damage, but not in the terms of raw damage and attack row versatility the Hellion can. She can be a strong position 1 dependent, but she can also be just moving around, so really she's not confined to the front position. She also has a multi-stun the front row through a Barbaric Yawp, and her ability Breakthrough allows her to be almost shuffle-proof, and with lineups I actually kind of recommend that. The only real downside is in her skills, where obviously she's going to suffer speed and sometimes damage based on that, which is why I put her at 20 points. She's not extreme, well, she is pretty high up there, but it's just, she's not like in the 24s or 25 obviously, but she's a very solid choice for damage and accuracy, and I think if you need a reliable character, the Hellion is there for you. To quickly review, we have the Highwayman at 24 points, the Shieldbreaker at 22 points, and the Hellion at 20, and these three heroes effectively make up your S tier, Tier A. Man-at-Arms, 19 points. This was the hero I was really struggling because he just doesn't have really the raw damage that the Hellion has, and that kind of in the end made it up for me. Though the Man-at-Arms skills are just so darn good, and he can really help you get through a lot of bosses, I think in general dungeons the Hellion is a lot better for team compositions and just damage. I didn't calculate camping skills into this, but the Man-at-Arms is definitely one of the best characters for camping skills, so that is something to consider in your own free time. However, that would be too many additional factors in this review, so I left them out for now. He can be a full support character if you want to and be extremely good at that, and he can also be a pretty decent offensive character. Not the highest damage, but it's definitely respectable if you decide to give him 1 damage increase trinket. And he is also the second character with the riposte, so he definitely gets an A spot for possibly riposte, increasing dodge, decreasing speed and dodge of the enemy while protecting you. He's the veteran you absolutely need in your party sometimes. Occultist, 19 points. A sketchy hero who works with magic in the dark, but his skills and possible damage against Eldritch-based enemies can really shine through. Like the Man-at-Arms, not all characters need to do intense damage to be very useful to the party and be highly rated in my opinion. The Occultist practically has everything you'll need in a dungeon and can work very well in any party composition. He can be to the front line with stuns and stabs, to the very back line where he's raining down artillery, pulling enemies and marking for you. A more stun-centric front and a more pull-heavy support back system. Pulls, marks, damage decreases, protection decreases, and a strong second viable healer in the game. The combination of skills is just too good. However, he gets a bad rap for his big zeros, but outside of his healing skills, he's a very strong character. You may have some really great experiences with the Occultist and you may not, and that might be thinking, wow, you put him at A. It might be just those big zeros you're thinking about, but he really does have a wide range of support skills that can work in many parties. Bounty Hunter, 18 points. The Bounty Hunter is a great combination of damage and support. He can function very well in many dungeons since his extra damage comes from humans and marks. He has multiple stuns through flashbang and my personal favorite, Uppercut, and he has 2 forms of mark, via Come Hither and just the marking ability. This allows him to function in mark strategies very well while discombobulating the enemy lineup. This party shuffling can sometimes make the enemy damage dealers rather weak by sending them to the back row, most notably the Cultist Brawlers, and also make stress damage dealers rather easy, such as bringing forward a Bone Royalty where they can only do Knife in the Dark. He's very good at mitigating damage or mitigating stress damage if he's able to pull or push. A potentially high damage dealer, very good stats, and can easily manipulate the enemy lineup to your advantage. Fletchling, 18 points. I was really torn between this character and the next one, and once again, let me know if you disagree. This is our second DLC character. He doesn't get the top tier in the S, however he's very strong praise and he's definitely a maybe lower A, really high B, which is why he's in the lower A here. His raw damage can be pretty strong, but that's not exactly what we're looking for. His weapon is actually on the lower end, but as you know, the lower he gets on HP, the stronger he gets, and also those DOT damage. He's like the reverse Plague Doctor essentially. He's there to hit both back rows, add 5 DOT there, and smash people in the front row for 6 DOT. He can actually work pretty well with the Plague Doctor as well with the stun and bleed combo, so you can actually have them both in the party and have them pretty effective. His stats are pretty good in terms of HP and survivability, which allows him to heal and tank, which is something damage dealers can't often do. It's a very strong combo, and with his DOTs, he can actually work through pretty high protection based enemies. You're just going to have a little sustain in your party as you wait for those to tick out. But he can still do a decent amount of raw damage once he's around 40% HP. And he can actually be a support hero, which is kind of weird. It's not his strongest suit, but it is definitely a possibility. Thus, he can actually be in a lot of party compositions if you open your mind up to it. Tier B. Before we begin, I just want to say that Tier A and Tier B were so close to each other, I think you could really argue swapping any of these 8 heroes around, and I would probably agree with most of your decisions. It was very, very hard for me to really calculate all of these, which is why I said I forced myself to do it because I didn't want to just cherry pick and just say, well, all 8 of these characters are A, so I'm just going to throw that out there again. Howmaster, 17 points. Most of his abilities are good, but I would not classify them as great, hence why he exists in the B tier. He can do great damage with dog bones, on marks, and even against beast related targets. Hound's Harry is also great AoE choices for some bosses and enemy lineups. However, he can be limited in certain dungeons with high bleed resist and some protection, just like the Fletchling. He's a decent stressed healer, however it's not reliable or necessarily the largest, but it's still good since it affects all 4 party members. His stats are decent, but due to his lower damage and slight need for DOT/mark reliance, it does put him a little lower on my list. He was on par with the Fledgling and may be really hard to separate to, but the less survivability and the strong DOT dependence, and I know that sounds funny because that's all the Fledgling does, but I feel like the Fledgling can make up in other support aspects as well. Let me know if you disagree, if the Howmaster should be in the A tier or the B tier. Jester, 17 points. The Jester down this low may surprise some of you, since he might be a staple in your party composition, as he is for me. His skills are undeniably useful, and Battle Ballad and Inspiring Tune are some of the best support skills in the game in my honest opinion. The ability speaks for themselves, but the Jester is heavily reliant on 3rd position, which is why he's low on party composition friendliness to me. His damage is also pretty DOT dependent, thus if it doesn't go through, he doesn't really have any damage. But there is a bomb of finality, which is why I do give him a B, and with his bleed abilities actually being decent. He does have really good stats, which helps him with a lot to go first, and the dodge is pretty good. However, he is fairly reliant on a strong heal since his HP is rather low, so if you do get hit about twice, you're going to need a strong heal to probably get him away from death's door. Thus, the dependability on 3rd or 4th position, necessarily not the strongest damage without Finale, which obviously has a crucial debuff and you need to work him towards the front row. He's definitely a B because of that S and the skills, however, I do think he's justified as a B, but a very important B. Plague Doctor. The Plague Doctor is insanely good at control and blight DOT. Some of her other abilities are situational or preference, but the main reason why people use her is for the strong DOTs and obviously Blinding Gas, the double stun in the back row, where stress damage dealers love to live. I have used Embalming Vapors for significantly longer boss fights, but not for a regular fight. It's very good, it's just you really want some time to boost that up. Her stats are mediocre, which makes her vulnerable to damage, such as skull tosses, which are very annoying to her. She has low bleed resist and stun resist as well. And as I said before, she's probably not going to dodge skull tosses, so she's going to take a lot of stress in the back row there, which is not great. She's still great against high protection based enemies, obviously with the DOT, and she can actually function in a decent amount of rows, but once again, she highly functions in rows 3 to 4 very well. Overall, she works very well, but due to her not having really quick damage and low survivability, she does belong in the B tier in my mind. However, as I say, absolutely not going to discredit how good she is. Crusader, 17 points. I would argue that he's also very close to the A tier, and you're beginning to wonder why. His biggest weaknesses really are the row versatility without Holy Lance. Holy Lance is great and all, but it has to function in a lineup where shuffling is constant. If you do that, that's very good. However, if you use him as a front 2 row Crusader, most likely this is not going to happen. And if you have Holy Lance off, and if you get surprised for shuffle, it's pretty much game over. You're going to be turning him into a support Crusader until you get lucky and he's put into the front row. However, he also belongs in the B tier because he does actually have some decent heals, stress heals, a protection, and he does have a stun, which is pretty darn good. His high HP and damage will make up for his semi-crap and speed, and as I said before, he can actually be a static hero, which is nice, and he can kind of move a little and sit in the back row sometimes if you want him to be more support-like, so he's actually pretty party-friendly. We all know his damage is really great against unholy creatures, and it's pretty decent against others as long as they don't have high protection. With his conglomeration of abilities, the Crusader belongs in the B tier. He's very close to the A and very close to the C as well, and I'm interested to see where you think he belongs. Tier C. Tier C is where you're going to see the biggest point differential, not in the first character, but after that, that's where you're going to see it. Grave Robber, 16 points. The Grave Robber is a pretty good choice, but in most situations, the Shieldbreaker always has a similar skill set where it actually just works much better. Ironically, the Grave Robber functions very well with the Shieldbreaker, but she doesn't function the same without the Shieldbreaker, but the Shieldbreaker can still function the same without the Grave Robber. So that dependency really for me separates the two, and that is why the Grave Robber is so much lower in my mind. You can definitely do massive damage with the Grave Robber. If you set her up with, the stealth ability and then you go for a lunge on someone that is blighted, it's big damage. In my Grave Robber review, I show some of that big damage. We're talking 40-50 crits, which just decimates pretty much anyone. Even through protection, she can do that much damage. Her damage can be pretty darn underwhelming though, if you do decide just to use the throwing dagger over and over again. But if you decide to use lunge or utilize mark compositions with blight, she can be a respectable amount of damage, which is why she's very high in the C and almost in the B tier. She's very friendly to team compositions as well, and her attack row diversity is really great, but overall her skills feel a little lackluster and she needs too much buildup from others to do big reliable damage. Vestal, 14 points. My grievances with the Vestal are almost the same as the Jester. A very strong character in terms of skills, and you can't really live without her in certain dungeons and bosses. But some of her abilities really feel lackluster, and if she gets shuffled, she's almost completely useless. Her damage is mediocre, and even if you're in the ruins, she's like a B-rate Crusader, so you might as well take in a Crusader. Her abilities in the 4th position offer little damage. She does have a stun. However, she doesn't have the highest of accuracies, thus she's going to get maybe dodged a couple of times on those Judgment and Ray of Light abilities. She has more HP, but her dodge is terrible, so thus like the Plague Doctor criticism, she's going to get Skull Tossed hard, and if you can't get rid of a ghoul, she might get Skull Tossed twice, which might put her up to 35 to 40 damage with a stun, so it's really not going to be a reliable character to dodge. Her stun and illumination are good, but illumination needs to be in the 3rd position, where there's other characters I think are much better, such as the Jester and the Plague Doctor we just talked about. Thus the Vestal is very generic, but her heals definitely keep your party alive, and is oddly a must-have in some situations, despite me ranking her so low in this tier list as I said before. Remember, the rank does not mean the hero is not crucial, it just necessarily means compared to other people, they might be rated like a C. The Vestal is the only character with this level of heals, thus there's not many other great options for AoE healing, so this is more of a need rather than the character is just really good. It's a weird idea, however I do believe she's a pretty mediocre character overall outside of her healing based abilities. Leper, 14 points. If you know my channel, this hurt, but I believe this to be as accurate as possible. The Leper is definitely C tier, but not in the lowest for sure, since his damage, his stats, and skills are actually pretty darn good. The stats, which some people may dislike, is the insanely low speed, but there's other ways to get around that by upgrading his speed by 4 with one ability. The Intimidate ability is not something you probably use often, however there are a couple of bosses you can use to decrease damage, and obviously it gives them a little more speed, which is very nice. If he moves outside the first 2 rows, he probably literally can't do anything useful for your party, and that's where this pretty much comes to the biggest problem with him. His other major setback is anyone with high protection, so if you get 2 people with 45% protection plus in the front rows, he's just going to have to chop through them or intimidate the back row, which isn't necessarily what you want to use the Leper for if you bring him along. I have a strong like for the Leper, but his flaws definitely cannot be overlooked, and he needs other people to be built around him to maximize his damage, because alone he really cannot, which is why he's in the C, because you can't exactly throw a Leper in everywhere like you can some other damage dealers, so thus he's much lower and his accuracy really does hurt him. Arbalisk and Musketeer, 14 points. This hero and the next hero were very difficult for me. I could, on any given day, probably swap these 2 out, but for right now the Musketeer Arbalisk are going to take the C tier for me. The Arbalisk skills are actually pretty good for some of them. What makes her slightly painful is her low speed and her lower base damage. This is obviously done for the mark setup, however mark setups can be ineffective against some bosses. Also, the mark setup does not necessarily guarantee a one-time shot, thus 2 to 3 rounds can be spent trying to kill one enemy in the back row. You don't want to spend one hero turn marking and then getting possibly the lowest damage and taking 2 rounds to kill a back row hero. It's not something you want when the mark strategy should be probably blowing people away in one turn. The Arbalisk can function pretty well between positions 3 and 4, but outside of that she's pretty bad. Just like the Leper is pretty good between positions 1 and 2, she's pretty good at positions 3 to 4. Once those 2 characters kind of get swapped, that's when they start falling apart and don't offer much to your party. Now what I will say is the Arbalisk is much more team friendly in the terms of support skills, thus she can suppress the back row and she can also de-stealth a wide range of people. So she does have some pretty good support skills, and she also has a heal that can be used on other individuals and also synergize with people such as the Occultist or the Vestal. So she's pretty darn good. Thus, I kept her in a C tier because I think she's much more team friendly than the next person. Tier D. Abomination, 13 points. This and the Musketeer I could swap around, but really settle it for me on the Abomination was the early game Abominations are probably some of the hardest things in my personal opinion to bring up and have a friendly team composition around. His stun is also 10% below average, and his DOT damage is also pretty weak, thus the lower stun chance and the lower DOTs don't exactly make me want to have him as support Abomination when there's someone like the Plague Doctor. Also, as I alluded to before, the first row Abomination is really great for damage, but the happiest place for him is the second position. Thus, if you have people shifting him around, you can really mess up your composition super easy with an Abomination. And obviously when he transforms, he's going to stress people out. So despite his great damage, his rage ability is really good, his very good stats, his overall skill and team composition hurt him greatly. As I said before, the Abomination is one of the toughest classes to bring up, and I know it's not exactly something in there, but it is something to think about. So on top of all that and the early game hardships you're going to face because of his lackluster support based skills, I do think he belongs in the D tier. He can absolutely shred certain bosses and he should not be underestimated. I do think he can be very difficult to stick into some team competitions though. Like the Leopard, you kind of have to build around him and not have him be added in as goodness. Antiquarium, 12 points. The Antiquarium is indeed a money machine, however she can be a little difficult to make up for at times. Her extreme lack of damage and her hilariously low HP, that her dodge is higher than her HP, can cause her to feel like an escort mission rather than an actual party member. She can fit into a couple of strategies very well, but you do need some really high damage dealers to make up for them. This often includes a Highwayman, obviously the very best character, and then you're going to pair him with the very worst character, and the Protect Me Repose strategy. She can kinda add more damage to the party that way, but all you're really doing is funneling more attacks to the best character I put in the tier list, so that's why it makes sense. Some of her skills are actually really great ideas and are honestly borderline broken if they were buffed a little more. Such as if you went from 10 dodge to 15 dodge per use, you could go to 30 dodge in 2 turns rather than just 20. You can't just build this beautiful 3-person composition and be like, yeah, screw it, put the Antiquarium there. It's probably not going to work unless you've done the party 100 times, you forgot to put the Antiquarium in first. So the Antiquarium is very useful. She obviously gets you a crap ton of cash, but really it feels like you're fighting about 3.5 in strength against 4-person lineups, and that does add a different level of stress. I hope I said enough throughout the video. I never like dumping on one character. I always use every single hero in the game on a regular run through because I do believe all of them have their independent uses. Some are much more team friendly, as I said before. However, I believe each one has an insanely good use, and I always keep at least one in every single time I play the game. Please let me know where you disagree. Leave a like and a comment down below. If you like this video, check out the rest of my channel. Thank you so much, like and subscribe below, and I look forward to these great conversations.